I call the member for Brisbane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I want to congratulate you to your elevation to the chair, and it's befitting that a fellow Queenslander is in the chamber today. I rise today to speak in support of Infrastructure Australia's amendment, Cost-Benefit Analysis and Other Measures Bill 2014. The bill amends Infrastructure Australia Act 2008 to clarify the legislation and administrative arrangements for Infrastructure Australia, and it will enable a reordering of provisions pertaining to cost-benefit analysis on infrastructure proposals in the Act to ensure that these analyses form the evaluation of proposals. Deputy Speaker, the bill makes provision for Infrastructure Australia to evaluate proposals involving Commonwealth funding of at least $100 million. And Deputy Speaker, I note that this involves a clarification and the bill is of an administrative nature, not involving financial or regulatory impacts. In fact, Infrastructure Australia has already been tasked with acting on these new administrative arrangements. Bringing this bill before Parliament and the Australian people is essentially about transparency and ensuring that all Australians are well informed about the changes that will impact on their lives. And most importantly, it's about ensuring that taxpayer dollars are well spent. Deputy Speaker, impacting Australian lives for the better is in itself quite meaningful when you look at the importance of well-directed infrastructure spending in Australia. Reliable and cutting-edge essential infrastructure is not only a defining feature of a prosperous and developed economy, but it is, not surprisingly, a cornerstone of what the coalition government promised to deliver to Australians. I recall Prime Minister Tony Abbott's words upon being elected: "We will build the roads of the 21st century because I hope to be an infrastructure Prime Minister who puts bulldozers on the ground and cranes into our skies." And the Prime Minister has been very busy making good on this promise ever since, with a staggering $50 billion of the Infrastructure Investment Program committed in the May budget, and a staggering $16.4 billion, much more than Labor promised. In fact, Labor not only promised less, but it took what it did have and it used it for indiscriminate, undirected, even random infrastructure spending at enormous cost to the Australian taxpayer. At an Infrastructure Partnership Australia address, the Prime Minister made the extent of these indiscretions very, very clear when he said there has not been a single cost-benefit analysis published prior to any of this government's infrastructure commitments, when he was talking about the previous government. Every single program and project has gone ahead because it suited the government's political agenda. Whether it actually met the long-term economic needs of our nation had never been the government's main concern. And the result is that you have an infrastructure spending gap that Infrastructure Partnerships Australia estimates would cost $800 billion over the next decade to fill. There is a better way, he said, and the Coalition has a plan for Australia's infrastructure of the future. Well, in stark contrast, we did have a better way. The Coalition's $50 billion fund will be used to deliver vital transport infrastructure across our cities, our regional centres and our rural centres, removing the black spots and ensuring that no Australian community will ever be forgotten and no Australian community will ever lag behind. And I can speak about experience, about what it means to be forgotten and to lag behind, because coming from the state of Queensland, we did have some of the worst infrastructure in Australia. And given that the Bruce Highway singularly accounts for the worst record of deaths of any roads, we cannot afford any more neglect. The Bligh Labor government certainly did our state no favours, absolutely no favours in this regard. And as Australia's second largest state, Queensland's economic well-being is very heavily dependent on infrastructure development, and that's why Labor's appalling neglect just does not add up. Deputy Speaker, the Abbott government will bring back to life what should have been an intrinsic link between infrastructure and its development and economic prosperity. We understand that better roads and rail networks deliver savings in key areas. They bring time savings, they make it easier to get freight around, they make it easier to move around our rural and our regional cities, and they bring cost savings as travel times and therefore fuel costs are cut, so we can spend less time, much less time, travelling to and from work and they bring life savings. With my state of Queensland being a case in point, the Coalition's commitment of $6.7 billion, with a further 20% being committed by the Queensland State Government, may save up to 40 lives a year. That's a lot when you think that one death is too many and all deaths are unnecessary. Time savings are also likely to provide an incentive for safer driving practices in industries such as trucking, where a large amount of time is spent on roads. And Deputy Speaker, for many of us, improved vital infrastructure represents a better work-life balance, and for others, it can mean all the difference in the world. Investment in infrastructure is essential for our growth as a nation, with population growth rates, according to the ABS census data from 2013, averaging 1.7%, or close to 396,000 across Australia. If our investment in roads and other transport networks, the infrastructure today that Australians rely upon, fails to keep pace with this rapid population growth, it will negatively impact on our social and economic fabric. And that's just not the way that we as a nation want to be identified. That's right. But rather, we need to set before us the goal of being progressive and being as efficient a society as we can possibly be. Deputy Speaker, it's in this context that the Abbott government has brought this bill before the House, not as a legal necessity, but as government willing to show its hand and to keep all Australians well informed of the changes that impact on lives. The bill reflects the Coalition's recognition that reliable and efficient infrastructure has an operational foundation. It involves sizable projects, all three levels of government, and a significant coordination requirement. Prior to the 2013 election, we indicated that we would create an expert advisory body, Infrastructure Australia, that was much more stronger, much more independent and much more transparent. The vision was for Infrastructure Australia that it would be an expert advisory body. It would facilitate effective coordination between industries, states and territories, particularly in prioritising and advising on infrastructure proposals. Deputy Speaker, I'm really pleased to say today that Infrastructure Australia is truly, and when I say truly, I do mean truly, a truly independent advisory body with a CEO responsible to a board and a new chair, Mark Beryl. It will provide an assessment every 5 years on long-term infrastructure needs. It will inform budgetary and political processes well before it becomes critical for decisions to be made, and estimates will be indexed to ensure relativity. Deputy Speaker, the Abbott government is well advanced in achieving these improvements on the operational efficiency for large infrastructure projects, having tasked Infrastructure Australia to assess projects receiving government funding of $100 million or more. It will publish reports on its website, has a transparent advice for government. It will audit nationally significant priorities. It will develop a 15-year plan on infrastructure priorities to be delivered in 2015 as well. Deputy Speaker, it's also noteworthy that work on the promised National Infrastructure Audit has been in consultation with state and territory governments, again consistent with our commitment to ensure coordinated responses to infrastructure needs. It's also noteworthy that Infrastructure Australia remains a key advisory body with an independent view. It is not a decision-maker in terms of funding allocation. These decisions and these processes will remain the domain of the government of the day, and decisions will be the result of a publicly informed political process and, importantly, the result of a robust cost-benefit analysis. It was only in recent times that we recoiled in absolute horror as our Minister for Communications, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull, spelt out clearly for us the terrible price to be paid for the Labor Party's complete lack of regard for due diligence, particularly when it was dealing with the NBN project. And he said, "Labor is in denial about the NBN failures under its watch. There must never again be a government project undertaken without a cost-benefit analysis." A big government project without a cost-benefit analysis, and the NBN couldn't get any bigger. Deputy Speaker, a cost-benefit analysis for the NBN has finally been concluded, And after the fact, the results speak for themselves. Providing fast broadband to the bush through wireless and satellite services will cost nearly $5 billion but produce only $600 million in economic benefits, a return of just 10%. But what's the use of a cost-benefit analysis now? This insidious piece of poor decision-making and politicking has left us rolling out the most expensive, inefficient network, which was a second-rate solution from its inception in the minds of a seemingly mindless opposition. And should the Labor government ever again see the light of day in government, we will certainly be ready to hold it to account, with an expectation that it will take a leaf out of our book and never again act with such contempt, without trust, and also ruin the hopes of Australians that it meant to responsibly represent. In Minister Turnbull's words, the screamingly important message is, why wasn't a cost-benefit analysis done beforehand? There must never again be a big government project undertaken without a cost-benefit analysis. Deputy Speaker, the Coalition now makes good on this promise, and there will not be more NBN-style disasters on our watch. The Abbott government's good news story is that improved planning and advice will ensure that infrastructure and therefore the standard of living of all Australians will be improved for decades to come. Improved coordination and prioritisation will eliminate the waste and the duplication that we have become accustomed to. Australians deserve to reap the benefit of taxpayer dollars that are well spent. The alternative, the costs that are borne by all Australians on numerous levels, can be ill afforded. Deputy Speaker, I realise that there is no small change involved when we are dealing with infrastructure investment, but I believe I can rest my case in demonstrating that efficiently allocated and well prioritised infrastructure spending is beneficial for all Australians, and this bill is about positioning Australia well into the 21st century, has a growing and prosperous economy, and I commend it to the House.